It begins like any other morning at Manchester Airport. The echo of wheels on tiled floors, the low hum of engines rolling toward the runway, families returning from holidays, shuffling through arrivals, already picturing the drive home. Among them are the travellers who paid for a simple luxury, a meet-and-greet parking service, a promise that someone in uniform would take their car, keep it safe, and have it waiting when they returned. Convenience, sealed with trust. But trust has a way of cracking under the right pressure. One by one, those returning passengers began unlocking cars that told a very different story. A BMW that had gained nearly 700 miles, mud plastered across floor mats that hadn't been there before, a car supposedly parked in a secure compound, now dented, ticketed and smelling of smoke. Some tracked their vehicles through phone apps and watched the routes replay. Their cars had been driven around Manchester while they were lying on beaches hundreds of miles away. What began as a trickle of confusion became a wave of outrage. People had paid for safety and been sold carelessness, and behind it all was one man, Mohammed Isaq, a 62-year-old businessman from Hale Barnes who turned the airport's busiest promise into a quiet, calculated scam. This isn't the story of a stolen car, it's the story of hundreds, of customers misled, of fields filled with vehicles that were never meant to be there, and of the man who made it all possible. This is the man who parked your trust. Before we go further, ask yourself, when you hand over your car keys at the airport, who are you really trusting? The websites looked professional enough, clean logos, polite assurances, and photographs of floodlit compounds lined with security cameras. Affordable, reliable, trusted by travellers. The language was comforting, the prices tempting. For £70, drivers were promised peace of mind. They would hand over their keys at the terminal. Uniformed staff would take the car to a secure, CCTV monitored facility until their return. The entire process sounded effortless, but there was no secure facility, no floodlights, no compound. Cars were driven off-site and left in farmers' fields, on industrial estates, and down narrow residential roads around Manchester. When it rained, tyres sank into soft soil. When the sun came out, the mud baked onto bodywork like cement. Some vehicles were scraped or dented, others returned with hundreds of extra miles, proof they had been used while their owners were away. Several customers came back to find parking fines on their windscreens, issued on streets miles from the airport. The complaints multiplied fast. People compared experiences online, discovering the same phone numbers and websites recycled under new company names. Manchester Airport Parking Limited, Manchester Airport Parking Services, Manchester Meet and Greet Limited. Each time one business collapsed under criticism, another appeared with a similar name, the same promise, and the same deception. Behind the revolving doors of paperwork, the pattern never changed. Cars in, cash taken, corners cut. The turnover reached close to £200,000, but the real figure wasn't in money. It was in lives disrupted. Holidays ended in anger, insurance disputes dragged on for months, and travellers found themselves stranded in arrival bays at midnight waiting for cars that never came. All the while, Mohammed Isaq stayed out of sight. His operation thrived on invisibility, on the assumption that no one would look too closely at what happened after their keys were handed over. But that illusion was starting to unravel. Before the scandal, before the headlines, Mohammed Isaq looked like any other small business owner working the airport circuit. Hale Barnes, a quiet stretch between Manchester's suburbs and its runways, was where he built his reputation. Neat house, polished accent, business cards that promised reliability. Nothing about him shouted fraud. He understood what travellers wanted, ease, the kind of service that starts with a smile at the terminal and ends with a clean car waiting by the curb. So he gave them exactly that, on paper. This wasn't his first venture or his first time being questioned by authorities. Court records show earlier convictions for VAT fraud and for breaching fire safety rules, offences that painted a picture of a man comfortable cutting corners if it saved time or money. Yet none of it stopped him from trying again. When investigators finally confronted Isaq, his answers were as thin as the paperwork, excuses about weather, staffing and confusion. The evidence told a cleaner story, planning, profit and repetition. By early 2023, the file was complete, a thick dossier of statements, photos and payment trails. It proved what victims already knew. This wasn't mismanagement, it was manipulation. The case was handed to prosecutors. For years he had hidden behind documents. Now, documents would decide his fate. 30 August 2023, Court 1602, Manchester Crown Court. Reporters filled the benches. Victims sat quietly in the gallery. The man at the centre of it all, Mohammed Isaq, 62, stood accused of fraudulent trading. The prosecution moved quickly. They displayed the ads, the rebranded company names, the The photos of cars left in fields, the receipts recovered from the van. Each slide told the same story. Hundreds deceived, thousands lost, one man responsible. Investigators from Trafford Council and the National Crime Agency presented their findings. More than 500 vehicles affected, turnover around £200,000, and documented fraud between £30,000 and £100,000. For many in the gallery, this was the first time the full scale of the scam was laid bare. The defence offered little resistance. No elaborate explanations, no conspiracy. Just a quiet admission that things had got out of hand. The judge disagreed. He called Isaq the main instigator of a calculated scheme built on neglect and deceit. The verdict was swift. 17 months in prison, 6-year director disqualification. 2 of his adult children, Sultan Khan, 28, and Amani Khan, 27, faced the court too. Each admitted consumer protection offences by negligence. They avoided jail but were sentenced to 18-month community orders and 200 hours of unpaid work. There were no cheers when it ended, only quiet relief. For some, the sentence felt light. For others, it was the first proof that their anger had been heard. Outside, cameras captured the final image. The man who once sold peace of mind for £70 a booking, walking toward a prison van under the flash of lights. Inside, as the doors closed, years of convenience, deception, and denial collapsed into a single truth. He built an empire out of trust, and it finally caught up with him. When the sentence was announced, it didn't make front-page headlines. There were no documentaries, no prime-time interviews, just a few columns in local papers, and a quiet nod from those who had been following the story from the start. But for the people who lived it, the impact of the scam didn't end in court. Even after Mohammed Isaq began serving his sentence, the shockwaves of his operation continued to roll through Manchester's travel industry. Hundreds of travellers had lost not just money, but faith in systems, in companies, in the idea that convenience could ever truly be safe. Some victims told reporters they'd stopped using airport parking services entirely. Others said they still did, but never without a sense of suspicion. A few tried to claim compensation through their insurance, only to be told that their cars had technically never been stolen. They had handed the keys over willingly. The emotional damage was harder to measure. For many, it wasn't about the money, it was about betrayal, the realization that something as routine as a family holiday could be twisted into an opportunity for exploitation. As trading standards closed the file, the case became a talking point within consumer protection circles, not because of its scale, but because of its simplicity. There were no complex digital scams or offshore accounts, no cryptocurrency or shadow networks, just a phone line, a website, and a promise. Council investigators later called it a textbook example of everyday fraud, the kind that hides behind professionalism, runs on repetition, and survives because no one expects it. It showed how small businesses could exploit legal loopholes by cycling through company names faster than authorities could shut them down. In the months following the verdict, the National Crime Agency and Trafford Council began urging travellers to research parking operators before booking. Airports issued new statements distancing themselves from unofficial services that used meet-and-greet labels without authorization. Consumer rights groups released guides warning people to check business registrations, look for verified reviews, and avoid paying in cash. When he launched his airport parking businesses, the idea was simple. Use multiple company names, stay one step ahead of complaints, and keep trading. Each new brand began with a fresh promise. Manchester Airport Parking Limited became Manchester Airport Parking Services. When that drew scrutiny, he re-emerged as Manchester Meet and Greet Limited. The pattern never changed. The paperwork did. He wasn't the type to boast or post selfies beside luxury cars. He relied on anonymity, the power of being forgettable. Customers rarely met him, most never even heard his name. They saw the uniforms, the receipts, the digital confirmation emails, and that was enough. By 2018, he had built a quiet empire of assumptions, dozens of travellers handing over keys every day, each believing they were dealing with a legitimate company. Every smooth transaction added another layer of confidence around a system already beginning to rot. To those watching from outside, he seemed organised, disciplined even. To those caught inside his web, he was impossible to reach, impossible to hold accountable. It was an operation that depended entirely on one fragile thing: the belief that someone, somewhere, was in control. But that illusion was about to break wide open. The truth about Mohammed Isaq's operation came to light not through an investigation, but through chaos. The company's office wasn't an office at all. It was a rusting white van parked behind a storage yard near the airport. No signage, no security, just plywood walls lined with hundreds of car keys. Inside were handwritten receipts, cardboard boxes, and a phone line that connected the illusion to the real world. Then one night, the chain on the van's doors was cut. By morning, around 130 sets of car keys were gone. Cars couldn't be found. Customers returning from holidays stood outside arrivals with luggage and disbelief, waiting for vehicles that had vanished. Phones rang endlessly. Social media filled with pictures of the van, screenshots of unanswered messages, and warnings from stranded travellers. The illusion of professionalism collapsed overnight. When reporters and council officers arrived, they didn't find the secure compound promised on the website. They found rows of cars scattered through open fields and cul-de-sacs. No fences, no lights, no control. The image said everything. That break-in did more than expose a weak system. It tore the mask off an entire business. For the first time, officials saw what was really behind the adverts. No insurance, no tracking, no procedure, no accountability. Complaints flooded into Trafford Council's trading standards. Evidence mounted. Booking forms, photos, messages, all pointing to one man. The man who once sold safety now faced a system determined to prove how dangerous his version of convenience had become. The van theft had exposed the rot, but the investigation revealed the roots. Investigators matched receipts, website domains, and customer details to a single address in Hale Barnes, the home of Mohammed Isaq. Every document, every payment, led back to him. Teams visited the parking sites. The fields were still scarred with tyre tracks, old signs half buried in the dirt. Residents described nights when strangers parked cars on their streets until there was no space left. The investigators collected what remained from the van: soggy booking forms, torn receipts, and envelopes filled with cash deposits. They pieced together a timeline that stretched from August 2017 to February 2018, proving that hundreds of cars had been left unsecured while customers were abroad. Some victims came forward to describe their experiences. One man tracked his car through an insurance device and discovered it had been driven nearly 100 miles during his holiday. Another found his BMW parked miles away, ticketed multiple times. For the council, it wasn't just a matter of damaged vehicles. It was about restoring faith in a system that had failed to protect its own customers. By 2021, over 500 complaints had been documented. The scale was undeniable. With the National Crime Agency assisting, the case grew into a model example of how everyday fraud hides behind ordinary business. But even as the warning spread, similar stories began surfacing in other cities: Heathrow, Luton, Gatwick. Different operators, different faces, the same script. Cars left in muddy fields, keys stored in sheds or vans, websites promising the world for £70. Isaq's case became more than a local scandal. It became a symbol of how fragile trust can be in a convenience-driven world. The footage from the Manchester investigation, rows of cars caked in dirt, fines fluttering under windscreen wipers, circulated online as a cautionary tale. In comment sections and travel forums, travellers traded advice, warnings, and disbelief. Some defended him, calling it carelessness, not crime. Others argued the opposite, that deception doesn't have to be violent to be devastating. Months after sentencing, reporters tried to reach out to Isaq for comment. There was no response. His businesses were gone from company registries, the websites deleted, the phone numbers disconnected. But the story lingered, not in headlines, but in people's habits. Manchester Airport introduced tighter licensing for off-site parking operators. Councils began sharing data to spot patterns of company dissolutions and re-registrations, and new travellers, standing outside the terminal with luggage in hand, now double-checked where their cars would actually be parked before handing over the keys. In the end, the legacy of the scam wasn't measured in convictions or fines. It was in awareness, in conversations at check-in desks. Now, the story of Mohammed Isaq didn't reshape global crime policy, but it reminded people that not every danger hides in the dark. Some drive up in branded vests, smile politely, and ask for your keys. The echo of his actions still hums quietly in the background of every airport drop-off zone, a reminder that trust, once handed over, doesn't always come back in the same condition. The noise of the airport never stops. Engines hum, wheels roll, and travellers keep handing over their keys. Same smiles, same trust. Most will get their cars back without a scratch, but somewhere in that exchange still lives the echo of Mohammed Isaq's promise: safe, secure, reliable, and the reminder of what happens when convenience outruns caution. He's gone now, his companies are razed, his empire reduced to case files. Yet the habit that made it possible remains. If stories like this make you see the ordinary a little differently, stay with us. Subscribe, like, comment, share, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next untold story of quiet crimes hiding in plain sight.